Hey, I'm Katie Elise, a life coach to fellow mamas with special and medical needs kids. I teach simple and doable ways to live your life with more intention, shifting away from caregiver burnout and towards the thriving life that you desire. I also share stories from real moms just like you because I believe that sharing and honoring our stories is essential to feeling less alone on this journey. This is the Thriving While Surviving podcast. Let's get started. This week, I am going to be sharing about my experience as a mom to neurodivergent children. I have learned and grown so much in that journey, and it's had its fair share of ups and downs, but I'm just excited to be able to share about my experiences with you. So let's just go ahead and dive in. As you know, I have 6-year-old twin boys whom I'll be referring to here as baby A and baby B, since, they'll always be my babies. If you listened to last week's episode, you might remember that due to the twins being born prematurely, we knew that they were at a higher risk of having developmental delays. So we had them both plugged into early intervention services and therapies from a very young age. Up until the age of 3, they received in-home weekly early intervention, speech therapy, occupational therapy, and for a period of time, physical therapy through the regional center. I'm really grateful that one of the NICU nurses told us about the regional center and the free services they provide, because my kids did end up needing to have services for some developmental delays. The regional center provides these services up to the age of 3, and then at that age, the provision of services is transferred to the local school district. So around the age of 3 is when the school district did their own evaluations, and the boys qualified for IEPs, which stands for Individualized Education Plans. When the boys were babies, for a while we had suspected that baby B might be autistic from some different traits that he presented that are common to autism, like lack of eye contact. Baby A didn't seem to present with common autism traits. However, we were still concerned that something was going on that we couldn't quite figure out, as he really struggled with daily, frequent, intense meltdowns that were very difficult to understand and navigate. I know some of you might be thinking, he was 3 years old. Of course he's going to have meltdowns. But this felt really different, and we tried so many ways to help him and struggled to come up with anything that made sense. So when the boys turned 3, we had them both privately evaluated. Baby B was diagnosed with autism, and baby A was diagnosed with possible ODD, which stands for oppositional defiance disorder. The evaluator said that since they were so young and the evaluation was done via telehealth due to the pandemic, she recommended that they get reevaluated in a year. Right after they were evaluated, my husband, who's in the Navy, left for a 6-month deployment, and the boys and I moved in with my parents while he was on deployment. It was pretty difficult processing all of that information separately. For me, there was this mix of relief to finally have a diagnosis that could lead to some clarity and answers and support, and also concern about what these diagnoses meant for my kids, especially since there's so much stigma around autism. The evaluation report recommended ABA therapy for baby B due to his autism diagnosis, and parent-child interaction therapy for baby A. After much research, I couldn't find a therapist that offered this type of therapy that accepted our insurance, which was really the only way we could cover that therapy. As for the ABA, I started the process of enrolling baby B in ABA, which they were recommending 35 to 40 hours per week, which felt like a lot. The enrollment process at this particular provider ended up being so incredibly slow. While that was happening, I enrolled baby A in a local preschool and had mixed feelings about sending one of my twins to preschool while the other went to ABA. But I knew that they were different children with different needs. The delay in the enrollment process for ABA ended up being a blessing in disguise for us. Once baby B received his autism diagnosis, I dove headfirst into researching. I am the type of person that loves to read up on whatever it is that I'm interested in at the moment. And at the time, I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could about autism and how to best support my son. I am incredibly grateful that some of the child development specialists and speech therapists that I was following on Instagram happened to be sharing about autism and the neurodiversity model of autism. Neurodiversity challenges the conception of autism as a medical syndrome defined by functional deficits. Under neurodiversity, autism is seen as one form of variation within a diversity of minds. Many autistic advocates embrace this model where a range of neurological differences is viewed as being a part of a natural human variation. Some examples of people that are considered neurodivergent are people that are autistic, people with ADHD, OCD, dyslexia, etc. With this new information, I was learning the importance of listening to and learning from autistic adults, as they really are the primary firsthand source for learning about the autistic experience. I started following people on Instagram that shared about their own experiences being autistic and joined some helpful Facebook groups run by autistic adults. The more I read and listened, the more I came to understand autism not as a negative diagnosis that was something that needed fixing, but rather a different way that some people's brains are wired, a way that our society is not accommodating for. Yes, being neurodivergent has its share of struggles, but many of these struggles are simply because of a lack of knowledge, acceptance, and accommodations, not traits that are inherently wrong. I learned that ABA is based on compliance techniques and rooted in extremely problematic and toxic history. Many people even consider ABA to be abusive. I know that this is a very controversial topic within the world of autism, and I won't be diving deep into it, at least not today. I don't judge parents that are doing what they believe to be the very best choice for their children and working with the knowledge and the resources that they have available to them. Personally, after doing my own research, I decided that ABA wasn't something that I wanted for my children and that I would always lean towards the side of listening to those who have firsthand experience with something. Meanwhile, baby A was still struggling with daily aggressive meltdowns and constant irritability. Without being able to find a PCIT therapist, a parent child interaction therapy therapist, as was recommended, I was racking my brain and researching on what could possibly be going on with my child. The more I researched ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, the more it seemed like an unlikely diagnosis for baby A. ODD seemed to often occur after significant trauma, which baby A had not experienced. Several professionals I learned from seemed to think that ODD wasn't even really a diagnosis that would stick around and that it was often put on children that didn't seem to fit in any other category. Then I came across someone sharing on Instagram about PDA, which stands for pathological demand avoidance or persistent drive for autonomy. All of a sudden, my child's behavior suddenly made sense. PDA is considered a profile of autism that is a nervous system disability. People with PDA have nervous systems that, when faced with demands, even indirect demands, they are sent into fight, flight, or freeze mode. PDA is characterized by a survival drive for autonomy and equality. So, as you can imagine, this can cause major dysregulation, especially when you are a toddler that has little to no control or autonomy over your day to day life. People with PDA present very differently than autistic people without PDA, so it's very common to not receive an autism diagnosis. PDA isn't listed in the DSM 5, the current diagnostic manual used by professionals, and it isn't a diagnosis given in the US, but it is a recognized diagnosis in the UK and other countries. This can make getting resources and accommodations for PDA very difficult as it's not widely understood. At home, helping a child with PDA can require constant co regulation of their nervous system and parenting approaches that might look really different than typical parenting approaches. Finding out that baby A was probably PDA was so helpful, but it didn't necessarily change a lot of the struggles we were dealing with when it comes to his meltdowns and controlling behaviors. It did help give me a lens for understanding that much of his behavior was out of his control, not just him being defiant or difficult for no reason. There were seasons where his dysregulation was so intense that we would have to keep him and his brother separated for the most part for safety reasons, which was really difficult. Eventually, during kindergarten, we had him reassessed and he was given an autism diagnosis. I'm honestly still surprised sometimes that he was given the diagnosis since his autistic traits show up so differently than the more common ones. But we worked with someone that seemed to understand that autism can look very different from one person to the next and truly listen to our concerns and experiences. At one point, when the boys were in pre kindergarten, I had started going to therapy for my mental health, and my therapist had asked me if I had ever considered joining any sort of support group for parents of children with special needs. Around the same time, a friend of mine who also has a son that is autistic, shared with me a woman that runs a group called Mothers Together, where moms of neurodivergent children can join and be placed in a group with other moms and cultivate community and support. Now, I will be totally honest. I was skeptical at the idea of finding other moms that truly understood what my experience was like, that I also clicked with, but had reached a point in my life where the lack of friendships with people that understand my experience was isolating and difficult. So I decided to give it a try. I am so glad that I stepped outside of my comfort zone and did. I was placed in a group with 5 other moms from all over the United States and one from Canada, and we connected and ended up talking almost every day on a video messaging platform called Marco Polo. The format of being able to listen and respond when it worked within our schedule was flexible, which is exactly what we all needed. Our group hit it off right away, and we have talked almost every day since, and that was almost 3 years ago. I cannot emphasize enough the difference it has made in my life to have other moms that are non-judgmental and supportive and that just understand my parenting experiences on a level that most people don't. If you don't have friendships like this in your life, please don't give up or feel hopeless, because I genuinely never thought I would find them, and yet I did. A large part of my parenting journey to children with medical and special needs has been learning how to be a strong advocate for my children. I've had to learn how to do this in both the medical setting, but also in the school setting. So I want to talk for a minute about IEPs. If you aren't familiar with what an IEP is, IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan. An IEP is a legal document that lays out the steps and instructions for specialized education that a student needs in order to thrive in school. As the name suggests, it is customized to each individual. IEPs are for eligible children ages 3 and older in public school that qualify under one or more of 13 conditions under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and need services in order to thrive in school. When my children turned 3 and their services transferred from the local regional center to the school district, they were automatically evaluated and assessed for whether or not they qualified for an IEP, which they both did. So they've had an IEP for their entire education thus far. Children with IEPs have an IEP team, which consists of the child's parents or guardians, the education specialist assigned to them, and any providers that they receive services from at school, such as a speech therapist or an occupational therapist, and their teachers. This team has meetings to discuss the child's progress, IEP goals, and accommodations. The goal is for the team to work together in a collaborative fashion to make sure that the child has the right goals and support to thrive in the classroom. Navigating IEP meetings, procedures, and laws when you are unfamiliar with it can be rather intimidating. If you don't know very much about it, it can be easy to just go along with whatever the team says. But as a parent of a child with special needs, it's my job to advocate for my child's needs and well-being at school, and sometimes the team doesn't always agree on what that looks like logistically. One of my dear friends from the mom group that I joined has 4 children that are older than mine and much more experienced than I did navigating the IEP process. She generously volunteered to help me with my boys' IEPs and has since become an amazing IEP advocate. An IEP advocate is a professional advocate that is a part of the IEP team and helps parents advocate on their children's behalf. I have learned so much from her and her extensive knowledge and will forever be grateful for her help with this process. I won't go into detail in this episode about the difficulties I've faced navigating the IEP process and advocating for my children, but I will just say that it has not been an easy process and it has pushed me to grow my advocacy skills. There is so much I could share about this journey of being a mom to neurodivergent children. It's hard to know what to include and what not to include. I want to end this episode with a few pieces of advice to anyone that may be new to this journey. This is what I would tell my former self. Number 1, there is nothing wrong with your child. The way they are wired may be drastically different, and there may be many struggles that come along with that, but different is not inherently bad. Most of the time, the struggles stem from being in an environment that isn't designed for a neurodivergent way of being. Assume competence and know that your child is the same exact child before and after they receive a diagnosis. They just may need different supports than their neurotypical peers. Number 2, get and stay curious. Learn from people with firsthand experience being neurodivergent. Seek to support, not change your child. Number 3, trust your gut, your mama intuition. You know your child better than anyone else. Number 4, you are your child's best advocate. Don't be afraid to ruffle some feathers in the process of working towards making sure your child's needs are being met. I know this is not easy, especially if you are a people pleaser, which a lot of us are brought up to be, but it's so important that you remember that you are your child's best advocate. Number 5, while your child is wired exactly the way that they are meant to be and you love them endlessly, it does not mean that this parenting journey isn't difficult. Extend grace to yourself. Learn to accept that your day-to-day life probably looks different than how you may have thought it would and different from others. Number 6, find your support system. I know this isn't easy, but it's more than worth it. Surround yourself with people that understand what you are going through and people that are supportive of you and your child. Be willing to step outside of your comfort zone to find those people. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I feel honored to get to share some of my story here with you today. I would love to connect with you, and if you feel pulled to share your story here, I would love to discuss the possibility of having you as a guest here on Thriving While Surviving podcast. Until next time. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it so much if you would consider rating it, leaving a review, and sharing it with a friend that you think might enjoy it. Doing these things will really help the podcast get more visibility so that it can reach and impact more lives. If you found this episode helpful and are interested in learning more about what working with me looks like, I'm currently accepting clients for 2024. I would love to help you make this your best year yet. You can find my contact info in the show notes. See you next week.